Welcome to 2025, where the crypto world is about to go on fire. Matt Hougan, one of the brightest minds in the industry, just unveiled a jaw-dropping outlook for Bitcoin, Ethereum, and the entire crypto market. Are we headed for a financial revolution, or is something even bigger on the horizon? Stick around because this 2025 prediction is unlike anything you've heard before. But before we dive in, show some love. Smash that like button, drop a comment with your own predictions, and share this video with your fellow crypto enthusiasts. Don't forget to hit subscribe for more amazing updates that keep you ahead of the curve. Ready? Let's dive into the future of crypto.
You take the best performing financial asset of all time, which is Bitcoin, and you take a 10-year delay for demand to build up, and a huge audience of people who don't feel comfortable buying Bitcoin any other way, and you put them together, and it's just a spectacular result. Of course, there were other elements, right? There was what was going on with MicroStrategy pushing prices higher. There was what was going on with the US election pushing prices higher. But there was just huge pent-up demand. The thing I always come back to is the vast majority of investors still have zero exposure to Bitcoin.
Imagine a world where Bitcoin isn't just an investment, but a strategic reserve asset held by global superpowers. That's the seismic shift we're on the brink of, and it could send Bitcoin soaring to $500,000 faster than anyone anticipates. The US leading the charge by planning to add Bitcoin to its strategic reserve would set off a chain reaction like no other. Governments worldwide would scramble to secure their share, fearing geopolitical and financial disadvantages. The result? A rip up in Bitcoin's price so explosive that even the dramatic highs of 2024 would seem tame. But that's just the beginning. 2025 has been a landmark year for Bitcoin, fueled by unprecedented institutional and sovereign state adoption. Major financial institutions like BlackRock, Fidelity, and Vanguard have ramped up their Bitcoin holdings, further legitimizing it as the digital gold standard. This wave of institutional investment has created a supply shock, as the finite nature of Bitcoin's 21 million supply is becoming starkly apparent. Add to this the rise of sovereign state adoption. Countries like El Salvador, which pioneered Bitcoin as legal tender, are now being joined by nations in Latin America, Europe, and even Asia. These governments are leveraging Bitcoin to stabilize their economies, to hedge against inflation, and reduce dependence on traditional fiat systems. The domino effect is clear. As one nation succeeds, others follow suit, accelerating Bitcoin's global acceptance. The impact on Bitcoin's price? Mind-blowing. We're seeing a virtuous cycle. As adoption rises, demand skyrockets, while Bitcoin's cap supply ensures unparalleled scarcity. This perfect storm has analysts and experts revising their predictions, and with $500,000 no longer seeming like an exaggeration, but an inevitability. If 2024 was the year of preparation, 2025 is the year of execution. Bitcoin is no longer just a speculative asset. It's a cornerstone of financial strategy for institutions and nations alike. The road ahead is thrilling, and Bitcoin's journey to $500,000 is just the beginning of a larger global financial revolution. Let's get more insights from Matt Hougan, the CIO of Bitwise.
That has to change, right? Most investors are going to end up owning Bitcoin. The ETF was the first release valve to see that happen, and that led to this spectacular result.
You said that about 80% of the volume in ETF was coming from retail. Do you see the same behavior coming in?
It's starting to change. It's starting to change in the direction of more balanced. If you look at most ETFs globally, they vary by ETF, but it's fairly typical to have about half from retail and half from institutional. And that's the direction of travel we're seeing on these Bitcoin ETFs. You're seeing the share of institutional demand tick up a little bit. We're still in the high 70s on retail, but I think that will really start to change when we get the Q4 numbers. You get those reporting about 6 weeks in arrears. So we'll get the Q4 numbers in mid-February. I think you'll start to see it more like 75-25. And then over the course of the year, that's going to balance out more towards 50-50. The important thing there is that what that tells you is we've set these records, and the real institutional demand has only just started to trickle in. So it tells you that this inflow has a long way to go. I expect the $40 billion we see to be eclipsed significantly in 2025. I expect more inflows in 2025 than 2024. And it's because those institutions are really going to start to buy in mass. These demand curves are exponential, which means even in the early phases when they're building, you barely notice because it's going from a few million to like maybe 5 or 6 million. You start to see it, and then it escalates like that. And that's what we're going to see on Ethereum. There are a couple reasons for that. One is that, as you know, whenever an investor comes into crypto through Bitcoin, it sort of marinates for a while, and then they start to learn more about crypto. And then 6 to 12 months later, they buy Ethereum and other altcoins. That's happened for 15 years in crypto. And of course, it's going to happen with ETFs. So you get this echo boom. But I'm also just organically excited about where Ethereum is and where it's going in 2025. I think the setup is extremely strong to benefit from agentic AI, to benefit from stablecoin demand, to benefit from tokenization. All of those play directly into Ethereum, more so than any other programmable blockchain. So I think there's both this sort of natural increase in demand for the ETF, and then these huge catalysts from what I expect to happen in 2025. So I'm really bullish on ETH inflows in 2025. One of the biggest trends last year was corporations buying Bitcoin. MicroStrategy gets all the press, but there are dozens of companies beyond MicroStrategy that are moving on to this sort of Bitcoin standard of keeping their corporate treasury in Bitcoin, both public companies and then of course private companies as well, like Bitwise. But we, think there is demand to invest in these companies that recognize that holding traditional cash on a balance sheet is a losing proposition, right? Fiat currency loses value over time. So why do America's public companies and the world's public companies hold trillions of dollars in an asset that is depreciating over time? The smarter companies are moving on to this Bitcoin standard. So without talking about, again, the specific filing, which we made, and you can see at the SEC site, we think there is substantial demand to invest in these Bitcoin standard style companies. And we think it's a real differentiating factor, right? I think these are companies that get it. They see what's happened with the money printing. They see what's happening with fiat currencies worldwide. They're opting out of it onto a Bitcoin-based treasury strategy. And we think those kind of companies will be rewarded in the future.
I completely agree. I think we've seen a bunch, like Rumble came out not long ago saying 20 million, which is great. Data Planet is killing it. Of course, there is a bunch. But also we've seen Microsoft saying no. I think only 0.5% was in favor. Why do you think they are still not even considering having a strategic reserve in Bitcoin?
Yeah, I think it's important for people to realize who aren't in the traditional equity world that voting in traditional stocks is not like voting in crypto. Voting in crypto has real community engagement. People are engaged, they think about it. Most voting in the traditional equity world uses these proxy voting providers who are institutional consultants, the most TradFi of TradFi institutions as well. So when you see a vote like that, you shouldn't interpret it as actual Microsoft's shareholders, only 0.5%. It's really that the institutional capital outsources voting, and these TradFi suits just reflexively vote with the company. I think eventually you're going to see a Mag 7 company own substantial amounts of Bitcoin on their balance sheet. These are tech adjacent firms. Maybe it's not Microsoft, maybe it's Meta, maybe it's another firm, but I think you're going to start to see this happen. This has gone from a sort of crazy idea that only Michael Saylor was doing to an idea that now dozens of companies are doing. I think it will be hundreds of companies, and I think they'll be buying hundreds of thousands of Bitcoin per year. It's sort of another source of insatiable demand for Bitcoin. I think people have underestimated the degree of this change, right? I mean, crypto has been seen in a negative light by governments for the last decade. It's been fighting uphill, and it's not just gotten to neutral, it's gotten to overtly positive. You mentioned, of course, the Trump takeover has its own crypto czar. And in Canada, as you mentioned, the leading candidate is overtly pro-Bitcoin. Canada was like the anti-Bitcoin a few years ago. You remember the trucker protests and all of that. And now to see a potential prime minister who is pro-Bitcoin, I think people have dramatically underestimated the scale of this. I would also add, there's this question of whether we'll see governments around the world starting to add Bitcoin to their own balance sheets. I would say that possibility is not priced into the market at all, like zero. If that becomes a reality, I think you're talking about Bitcoin being many hundreds of thousands of dollars. There's just not enough Bitcoin in the world to facilitate that kind of demand without prices going substantially higher. So I think this is a real sea change. I think investors have underestimated it. I think it's going to have a long tail effect. It'll extend the bull market substantially in 2025 and potentially beyond. I'm hugely excited about it.
There's not going to be enough coins on the market. So are you expecting a supply shock at some point coming in?
Look, I mean, that's just the way math works, right? Like the Bitcoin network is going to produce about 160, 170,000 Bitcoin next year. Corporations bought 270,000 last year. ETFs bought 500,000. Governments are talking about buying hundreds of thousands. Any one of these sources is more than all the net new Bitcoin that comes out of the market. And that means, just from a simple perspective, that in order to satisfy that demand, which I think is unstoppable, I think you're going to see all three sources buy hundreds of thousands of Bitcoin. People who hold Bitcoin today have to sell. Maybe they're willing to sell at $100,000, but if they're not, what is the next level at which enough of them will sell? Is it 125? Is it 150? Is it $200,000? I think the market could sort of find itself in an air gap where people are unwilling to sell until it gets to a new major level. And that move could be very violent. You might remember last year, we bumped around the all-time high at like $72,000 for 6 or 7 months. And then when we broke through it, straight to 100, right? I think you could have an element like that here as well. We're hovering around $100,000, but if we get above it, straight to something, I don't know what that something is, but there is just too much demand, not enough supply, and the only solution to that is higher prices. I think that's what we're going to see in 2025. You know, look, I think if we get 10 or 20% above $100,000, people are going to assume that there is a sort of black hole pulling Bitcoin up to $200,000. I think when you think about this market where there's a fundamental mismatch of net new demand versus net new supply, and that has to be filled by people willing to sell, I think you have to think about behavioral cliffs. Who's going to sell at $117,000, right? No one is sitting at home on their sofa right now thinking, well, when it gets to $117,000, I'm going to sell. They're either thinking, I'm going to sell here at 100, or maybe I'm going to sell at 150, but probably I'm going to sell at 200 or 250. And I just think once we get sort of out of this center of gravity at $100,000, there is just this rush, as you said, people FOMOing in until it gets to, my guess is 200, it could be 250, maybe it's 150, but I suspect it's in that 200 zone. I've seen a lot of forecasts in and around $200,000. Bitwise said, we think Bitcoin will get above $200,000. I think 250 is definitely possible. That's a psychological number. And I think it could happen very fast.
That's a wrap for today's video. What do you think about Matt Hougan's analysis? Share your thoughts in the comments below. I'd love to hear them. If you enjoyed this content, don't forget to hit that like button and subscribe to the channel for more insightful videos like this one. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.